Hey y'all, it's me, Jen Chavez. We've got a special bonus episode of the Evergreen for you today. A year ago, you got a sneak peek at the first episode of the first season of Hush, OPB's investigative podcast from Leah Satilli and Ryan Hass. Today, we're bringing you an update on that case. And a quick note before we begin, this episode focuses on violent crime and racism. It contains honest depictions of racist statements, including a bleeped racial slur. Please keep that in mind when choosing when and where to listen. Harriet Thompson was a young mother who grew up in Salem, Oregon. Some of her friends called her Sunny. She'd pursued an education, but struggled with addiction. On March 20th, 1998, police found her dead inside her Salem apartment. Within a week, they arrested Jesse Johnson for her murder. He'd grown up in Arkansas and was living a transient lifestyle in Salem, also struggling with addiction. Harriet and Jesse were both Black, living in an overwhelmingly white state with a long history of racism. A random encounter with Harriet a week before her death changed Jesse's life forever. He spent a quarter century incarcerated, including 17 years on death row, for a crime he always insisted he did not commit. But in 2021, his conviction was overturned. 2 years later, prosecutors quietly dismissed the case against him. On September 5th, 2023, he walked out of jail as a free man.
Congratulations, Jesse.
All right.
Freedom, how's it feel, brother?
Oh, yeah.
Now, Jesse Johnson is suing. His case was the focus of Hush Season 1. Ryan Hass and I recently sat down to talk more about the new lawsuit over what Jesse and his attorneys say was a deeply biased investigation.
So this lawsuit is actually targeted against the state of Oregon primarily, but it's also targeted against the Salem Police Department and the specific detectives who worked his case, a detective named Craig Stolk and a detective named Michael Quakenbush. And this lawsuit basically says at its heart that these detectives in the Salem Police Department engaged in racism. They targeted Jesse because he was Black. The state did wrong here by locking Jesse up. They allowed Harriet's killer to go free, and he should be compensated for all those years he spent in prison.
Mm-hmm. One thing mentioned in the lawsuit was testimony given by Donald Shorty Blocker. And he said at first that Johnson had confessed to him, but I know that changed. So what does this lawsuit highlight about Blocker's testimony?
Donald Blocker is, amongst these drug users in Salem at this time. It's kind of a group of people who are hanging out together and maybe they're stealing some things and trading things amongst each other. And Blocker basically tells police this story that the day after Thompson is murdered, he runs into Jesse. Jesse is looking to sell some jewelry.
He said that he spent the night with this broad and that he robbed her for her jewelry.
And police made the claim that this jewelry he was trying to sell had belonged to Thompson.
And what happened during that?
He said that he offed the bitch.
He offed her?
He offed her.
Now, as they're going to trial, Jesse's attorneys hire this defense investigator to go talk to Blocker in a recorded conversation. And Blocker says, the police picked me up. I had all these drug charges. They told me, say these things. And then I said them.
If I asked him the questions that he wanted to ask, the way he wanted me to answer them, that you make sure no criminal charges were filed against me.
Now, the tape of this interview is very poor, but if you listen carefully and read the transcript, you can hear Blocker say, I was coerced into saying this. I said what Quakenbush wanted me to say to convict Jesse. And he ended up not only recanting that to the defense investigator, but then he goes to trial and is saying it again. He's saying like, oh no, what I said originally was true. I was just mad at the detectives, and that's why I recanted my statement. So clearly not a reliable witness.
Yeah. Okay, so another thing was that there were a few eyewitnesses in the neighborhood on the night of the murder, and two people said they saw a different guy, a white guy, leaving Thompson's house, right? And that's another thing specifically mentioned in this lawsuit. What came of that?
Yeah, I think this is the most compelling evidence that Jesse was not involved. The first witness is a woman named Patricia Hubbard, and she actually lived directly across the street from Harriet Thompson. Patricia worked really weird hours. She worked at a cannery in the Salem area, and so she would get home late or she would get up early. This murder took place around like 3:30, 4 in the morning.
I had grabbed a pop, probably a sandwich or a bag of popcorn or something, and went out and sat down and just relaxed on the front porch.
Patricia Hubbard told a defense investigator later, like, I was sitting on my porch, I was smoking a cigarette, I hear a bunch of screaming and cussing, and then I see a white guy bolt out of Harriet Thompson's house, down her driveway, straight towards me, turns up the road, and runs away.
Had you seen this white man before?
Many, many times.
Patricia Hubbard tried to tell detectives this, and they kind of dismissed that. The other person who saw something was a person that we actually uncovered through our reporting in the Hush podcast. Her name is Janelle Osborne now. It was Janelle Thomason at the time. And she was an 18-year-old newspaper carrier for the Salem Statesman-Journal. She was actually parked, there's this little parking lot right behind Harriet Thompson's house, and Janelle was sitting in her car that night rolling her newspapers, getting ready to go out on delivery, and she sees this white guy.
I saw them come running out, and then I was like, wait a second, that's really weird for somebody to be running at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and the person ran this way. They ran right by me, but as he was coming up, he turned and he looked at me.
And she said it scared her. She was like, I was terrified. I locked my doors. I told my boss at the paper, I'm never going to drive this route again. She also called the police and said, like, hey, I saw this. Police never really followed up with her.
I never heard anything from any judge, no lawyers, no anything.
The first people to follow up with her were Leah and I when we went and talked to her. Instead, police chose to speak to a guy named John Shaw. He was a helicopter pilot with the National Guard. He happened to be driving by that morning on the way to work, hours after the murder. It was close to 6:30 a.m. or so. And he said, when I was driving by, I saw a black guy, and that stood out to me. And the police sort of treated him as a star witness, and they said, like, he saw Jesse.
The suit alleges flagrant racism by these investigating detectives. What are they referring to, and what did you uncover in your own reporting with Leah in that sense?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think the first thing is what Patricia Hubbard said, because she said she was sitting there, she sees this white guy run up, and like the next day or a few days later, there's detectives or some law enforcement person out there talking to neighbors and things like that. And she says, well, I went up to one of them and I said, hey, I saw something that you might want to know about this case. I saw a person running away. And according to her, this law enforcement officer who was never identified said,
He said, that won't be necessary. He said, a nigger got murdered and a nigger's going to pay for it.
There's that, which is terrible. But then as we were reporting this series, we uncovered things about the detective Mike Quakenbush. Detective Quakenbush, one, already had a complaint in his record about using slurs on the job. His fellow officers actually reported him for saying that. And two, as we were interviewing him, we were asking him about, like, why did you focus on Jesse? Why did you lean on John Shaw's testimony versus these other people who said they saw a white guy? And he told us essentially along the lines of, well, once someone said there was a black guy.
There's just not a lot of black people that live in Salem, okay, and are committing crime here. So the number is far more limited.
So it's a lot easier to narrow down a pool of suspects as opposed to a white guy. And then he's telling us this story. He says, I've been written up for racism before on the job. And he starts telling us this story of, I was arresting this guy and he was black. And he said, I wish all the white people in the world were dead or something like that. And he starts using the N-word. In this interview, I'm running a mic. He's using the N-word and saying, well, I said N-word this, N-word that. And his response was, I was just giving it back to him what he gave to me. It was shocking. And Jesse's lawsuit, his lawyers point to that and say, like, look, this guy's on display. He's on the mic. He's comfortable saying this thing. It's like, what else is he comfortable with?
Okay, so what are Jesse Johnson and his legal team actually seeking with this lawsuit?
Yeah. So Oregon does have a law that allows people who have been wrongfully convicted of crimes to be paid out for that time they spent incarcerated. That roughly amounts to $65,000 a year for each year you're in prison. In Jesse's case, we're talking a lot of money. He was in prison for a long time. He was incarcerated at age 37, and he didn't get out until he was 62. So roughly somewhere around $1.5 million. In addition to that, though, getting a certificate of innocence and having his police records sealed is really important, I think, to those lawyers. They're seeking that. One other interesting thing I thought in this lawsuit is they are seeking money for all the work he did while he was incarcerated. After he got off death row, he worked in the jail laundry and is now saying, like, I spent all these years in prison and I'm working for pennies for the state. So you actually owe me wages for all that work I did.
So how has Jesse been doing in the time since you reported on his story?
I mean, I think it's up and down, right? Like, I think it's been challenging. You have somebody who lost the prime of their life to this case. He doesn't have Social Security. He doesn't have a nest egg. He's now retirement age, but he's having to work to pay his bills. He moved back to Arkansas. He tried to get back home to see family, but, he was staying with family, and one of the folks he was staying with passed away, unfortunately. And so it's just been a struggle for him. So getting this compensation is more than just like, oh, I'm going to get some money and that's going to be good, or I'm going to send a lesson to Oregon. It's really, for him, it's like, this is my life or death.
Before I let you go, I know you and Leah are hard at work on a new season of Hush. Can you tell us a little bit about what's in store for us with this new season?
So this next season takes place in Columbia County, Oregon, which is just north of Portland. It's a rural community, and it centers on this young woman named Sarah Zuber, who died in 2019. She was found 400 feet from her front door, and no one has ever figured out what happened to her. And what's really interesting about this season, I think, is all the ways that Sarah Zuber's story highlights kind of a decline in our trust in institutions and information systems, and what is starting to replace that in a lot of communities. We're very blessed here in Portland to have a robust media, but in a lot of these rural communities that doesn't exist. And I think part of this story is diving into that. We look into how this community, which is very tight-knit and everybody knows Sarah's name, is somehow unable to answer this question of how did she die so close to home.
That was OPB managing news editor Ryan Hass. He and Leah Satilli are the reporting team behind OPB's investigative podcast series Hush. Stay tuned for the second season of Hush. Their first episode drops on October 8th. Thank you for listening to a podcast extra from OPB's The Evergreen. I produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada, Julie Sabatier, Peter Frick-Wright, and Sage Van Wing. Leah Satilli and Ryan Hass compiled the audio from the investigation into Harriet Thompson's murder and did the additional interviews you heard. If you ever have a question for us, please reach out. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.